It was supposed to be a routine traffic stop, but nothing about this moment was routine. On the side of a quiet highway, blue and red lights painted the night as a police cruiser pulled up behind a sleek black car. The officer inside, full of arrogance and unshaken prejudice, stepped out with the weight of authority in his stride. He had done this countless times before, profiling, intimidating, using the badge as a weapon rather than a shield. But this time, something was different. The man he pulled over wasn't nervous. He wasn't fumbling with documents or offering excuses. He was calm, too calm, almost as if he knew something the officer didn't. And he did. Because in a matter of minutes, the power dynamic was about to flip in the most shocking way imaginable. The officer thought he was stopping just another black man. What he didn't know was that he had just cornered the head of internal affairs. And the fallout would change everything. The evening was unusually quiet, the kind of stillness that felt heavy, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The highway stretched long and empty, broken only by the distant hum of cicadas and the occasional flash of headlights in the distance. On this road, the law often felt less like protection and more like a trap. And for far too many, it was a trap that snapped shut without warning. Inside the sleek black car sat a man who knew this all too well. He wasn't just another commuter heading home after a long day. He wasn't just another face to be written off or pushed aside. He was a man who carried with him not just authority, but the knowledge of every flaw in the system, every abuse of power that went unchecked. He had built his career by rooting out corruption, by holding officers accountable when they crossed the line. But tonight he wasn't in an office or a courtroom. He was alone, unarmed, and about to be judged not by his record but by the color of his skin. Behind him, the officer's car loomed closer, its headlights flaring as if in challenge. The siren wailed once, short and sharp, cutting through the silence. The driver glanced into his rearview mirror, watching the figure emerge from the cruiser. Heavy boots crunched gravel. A hand rested casually, too casually, on the holster of a gun. To the officer, this was just another late-night stop, another chance to flex his power where he thought no one important was watching. But in reality, he had just set himself on a collision course with a man who held the authority to dismantle his entire career, and neither of them knew yet how quickly this encounter would spiral. The air grew, colder as the officer approached, each step deliberate, his flashlight slicing through the night like a blade. The beam landed harshly on the driver's face, illuminating his calm but guarded expression. The man inside the car didn't flinch. He had faced worse situations in his lifetime, but the weight of this moment was still suffocating. He knew how quickly encounters like this could escalate, how a single movement could be twisted into justification for violence. The officer's voice cut through the stillness, sharp and laced with authority. Questions came fast, not as requests for information but as accusations waiting for a slip-up. License, registration. What are you doing out here this late? Where are you coming from? His tone carried suspicion, as if the man in the driver's seat had no right to occupy the road at this hour. The driver complied with every instruction, his movements slow and deliberate, his hands in plain sight. He had spent years teaching others about these very moments, about how to survive them, how to avoid giving even the smallest pretext for aggression. Yet here he was, living the very scenario he had worked tirelessly to prevent for countless others. But something in the officer's demeanor made it clear this wasn't a routine stop. There was an edge in his voice, a simmering hostility that felt personal, even though they had never met. It was the way his eyes lingered not on the documents but on the man himself. A silent message pulsed beneath the surface. You don't belong here. You never will. Minutes stretched like hours as the flashlight beam shifted from the driver's face to the car's interior. The officer circled slowly, dragging the moment out, savoring the control he thought he had. A second squad car rolled up quietly, its headlights joining the first. Now there were two silhouettes, two sets of eyes, two figures who seemed to believe the night belonged to them. Inside the car, the man's heartbeat remained steady, though the air around him felt heavy with unspoken tension. He knew both officers saw him only as a threat. They didn't know his name, his rank, or the power he carried within his position. To them, he was just another black man driving alone at night, someone they could intimidate, someone whose story they thought would never be believed. But what they didn't realize was that he had been documenting encounters like this for years. He had read the reports, seen the patterns, tracked the misconduct that was whispered about in courtrooms but rarely punished. He knew exactly how officers manipulated situations, how they twisted narratives, how they played with power in the shadows. The longer the stop dragged on, the clearer it became that this was not about traffic laws. This was about dominance. The officer's hand brushed the edge of his weapon more than once, not because he felt threatened, but because he wanted the driver to feel fear. Every pause, every question, every slow circle around the vehicle was designed to assert control. Yet behind the calm exterior, the man inside the car was already calculating. He knew there would be a breaking point, a moment when the officer's confidence would collide with reality. He just had to remain steady long enough for that collision to arrive, and soon it would, because the officer had no idea who he was confronting. No idea that this seemingly ordinary man had the power to unravel everything he thought was untouchable. The stage was set. The tension was unbearable, and the night was only beginning. The patrol car's red and blue lights pulsed relentlessly against the dark canvas of the night, casting distorted shadows across the empty stretch of road. Each flash illuminated the driver's reflection in the rearview mirror, calm on the surface but carrying the quiet tension of someone who knew this scene too well. For many, a traffic stop was inconvenient. For him, it was survival. The officer's heavy boots crunched against gravel as he approached, the flashlight beam cutting through the night like an interrogation spotlight. The man inside the car kept his hands fixed on the steering wheel, his posture straight, his movements deliberate. He was rehearsing every survival instinct ingrained in him since childhood. Don't move suddenly, keep your voice even, comply without question. It was a ritual every black driver understood, passed down through generations, a silent inheritance no one wanted but everyone carried. The officer leaned closer, his expression tight with suspicion rather than professionalism. His words came clipped, barked out like commands to a subordinate rather than questions to a citizen. License, registration, step out of the car. Each order was delivered with the kind of authority that didn't just seek compliance, it sought submission. When the man responded with steady politeness, the officer's irritation seemed to sharpen. His jaw flexed, his eyes narrowing as though he had been denied the satisfaction of sparking fear. This wasn't about enforcing traffic laws anymore. It was about control, about establishing dominance. A second patrol car rolled quietly onto the scene, its headlights cutting a white glare through the night. Now there were two officers, two sets of watchful eyes, two shadows standing over one lone driver. It felt less like law enforcement and more like a coordinated display of intimidation. The man inside the car remained composed, though every second grew heavier. He had been in rooms where policies were written, where decisions about officers like these were debated, investigated, punished. But he never revealed his role. In this moment, he was faceless to them, just another man in a car, another figure they believed they could control. The first officer circled the vehicle slowly, shining his flashlight into every corner of the car. It wasn't a search for evidence. It was theater. Every pause, every sweep of light, every pointed look was designed to prolong the moment, to remind the driver who supposedly held the power here. The second officer lingered near the rear bumper, arms crossed, his silence carrying the same weight as the questions hurled at the driver. Why are you here? Why are you driving through this neighborhood? Why at this hour? Each question dripped with implication. It wasn't about traffic anymore, it was about belonging. They weren't asking where he was coming from. They were suggesting he didn't belong anywhere near here at all. The driver knew this wasn't just harassment. It was systemic. Encounters like this happened every night across the country, some ending quietly, others ending in tragedy. He had spent years reading those reports, hearing the grieving families, investigating the lies that were too often woven into official accounts. He had studied the body camera footage that mysteriously went missing, the testimonies that were contradicted, the complaints that disappeared in bureaucracy, and now he was living the same playbook he had spent his career trying to expose. The officer's flashlight beam settled back on his face, harsh and unrelenting. Step out of the car. The command came again, sharper this time. The man obeyed, his every motion measured, his gaze steady. Gravel crunched beneath his shoes as he stood in the glow of flashing lights, the night air thick with silence. One of the officers moved closer, crowding into his personal space, the posture not of a public servant but of a predator circling prey. His hand brushed against the holster of his weapon more than once, not because he felt threatened but because he wanted to remind the driver of what was hanging between them. The unspoken message was clear. I can escalate this at any second, and yet, the driver's calmness seemed to frustrate him even more. He expected fear. He expected trembling compliance. Instead, he was met with a quiet resilience that refused to break. The minutes dragged on, stretching into an eternity of questions, commands, pauses, and circling footsteps. The officers were waiting for a mistake, a misstep, something they could seize upon. But the man gave them nothing. What they didn't realize was that the balance of power wasn't what it seemed. The man standing before them wasn't powerless. He wasn't some nameless figure they could write off with a few lines in a report. He had authority, more than they could possibly imagine. In fact, within hours he could request their files. Within days he could summon them to answer for their conduct. Within weeks he could determine their careers. But for now he stayed silent, steady, allowing the performance to unfold. He wanted to see how far they would take it, how deep into intimidation they would wade before the truth struck them like lightning. And that truth was coming, whether they were ready or not, because this wasn't just another traffic stop. This was the night the hunter would realize the prey was never powerless. This was the night the story would turn, when arrogance collided with reality. The tension was reaching its breaking point. The stage was set for revelation, and soon the officers would discover exactly who they had dared to stop. The flashing lights didn't just illuminate the night, they split it open. Blue and red strobes bounced off the trees, fractured across the hood of the black sedan, and cast jagged shadows on the cracked asphalt. To anyone passing by, it would look like a routine traffic stop. But to the man standing under those lights, it was anything but routine. He had spent his life navigating moments like this. As a boy, his father had drilled into him the unspoken rules of survival. Keep your hands visible. Speak clearly. Never argue. Never make sudden moves. Lessons whispered late at night after the news showed yet another black man's life, cut short at the hands of those sworn to protect. Now, decades later, those childhood lessons were keeping him steady under the glare of an officer's flashlight. The first officer's posture was aggressive, leaning into authority that felt less about duty and more about control. His words were sharp, each command laced with irritation. License, registration, out of the car. It wasn't what he said, but how he said it. Not as though the driver were a citizen, but an intruder who needed to be put in his place. The man complied with every order, his movements precise and deliberate. He had nothing to hide, yet everything to lose. Every turn of his wrist, every step he took was calculated, not because he was guilty, but because he knew guilt wasn't always required for violence to erupt. A second cruiser slid onto the scene, its headlights slicing through the night. 2 officers now. Twice the scrutiny, twice the intimidation. The driver could feel the air shift, colder, heavier, as the circle around him tightened. The first officer began his performance of suspicion, circling the car, peering through the windows, running his flashlight beam across the back seat. It wasn't a search for contraband. It was theater. Each pause by the trunk, each unnecessary peek inside the empty passenger seat was a reminder. We control this moment. Not you. The second officer stayed silent, arms folded, his stance wide. His silence wasn't passive, it was calculated. He didn't need to speak. His presence was the threat. It was the weight of 2 against 1, of uniform against plain clothes, of a system that had been tilted for centuries. The driver's mind flickered back to the countless reports he had read in his office, files full of stories just like this. Men pulled over for broken taillights, for driving too slow, for existing in neighborhoods someone decided they didn't belong in. Reports where complaints vanished, body cams mysteriously malfunctioned, and victims' voices were buried under official accounts. He had been the one reviewing those cases, investigating misconduct, holding officers accountable, and now here he was, living the very narrative he had fought against. Step out of the car, the command came again, sharper this time. He obeyed, gravel crunching beneath his polished shoes as he moved into the open space between the two cruisers. The lights flashed against his suit jacket, catching every crease, every thread. To the officers, the suit meant nothing. To them, he was just another black man on the side of the road at night. The first officer moved closer, invading his space. The glare from the flashlight hit his face directly, so harsh it made him squint. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He stood steady, the very picture of calm under pressure. But inside, he was taking note of every move, every gesture, every word. This wasn't just a stop. This was evidence. Evidence of arrogance, of abuse, of the dangerous gap between power and accountability. The officer's hand brushed against the butt of his weapon more than once. It wasn't a defensive reflex, it was a display. A reminder of who held the immediate power in this exchange. The driver had seen that gesture in too many cases before. He knew what it meant. He also knew how quickly it could escalate if he broke the invisible script these officers had written for him. The questions began. Not questions rooted in law, but in suspicion disguised as curiosity. Where are you going? Why are you here? Do you live around here? Each question dripped with the same underlying message. You don't belong. The driver's answers were short, measured, respectful. He gave them nothing to latch onto, yet his restraint only seemed to irritate them further. They weren't looking for answers. They were looking for cracks. They wanted fear. They wanted obedience, and his calmness denied them both. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The night air was heavy, pressing down on him. Each passing car slowed, drivers craning their necks to glimpse the scene, their faces illuminated briefly by the flashing lights before disappearing into darkness again. To them, it was just another traffic stop. To him, it was the edge of a cliff. But beneath the surface, something else stirred. A quiet, unshakable knowledge. The officers didn't realize who stood before them. They thought they were dealing with just another black man they could intimidate. Another stop that would never make it past paperwork. What they didn't know was that the man standing calmly in front of them wasn't just any driver. He was the head of internal affairs, the very person who decided the fate of officers like them. And that secret, that twist of fate, was the powder keg beneath their feet. He didn't reveal it. Not yet. He let the silence stretch. He let their arrogance build. He wanted to see how far they would push, how deep into misconduct they would wade before the truth shattered the illusion of control. The officers thought they were hunting prey. They didn't realize they had cornered the hunter. Every second grew heavier, the suspense tightening like a rope. The moment was coming, the inevitable clash between assumption and reality. The driver remained still, composed, waiting for the perfect moment when their smug certainty would crumble. Because when the truth came, it wouldn't just expose their actions. It would change everything. The stage was set. The trap was already sprung, and in the next moment the balance of power would flip in a way these officers would never forget.